The hip hinge is one of the most fundamental movement patterns for the human body. However, so many fail to do it correctly, which can lead to issues like spinal issues, but also limit your functional capacity. So today we're going to break it down how you can perform it, starting off with the easiest and building all the way up to real challenging movements to improve your overall functional capacity. Why the hip hinge is so fundamental is because it ticks so many boxes of what we call movement proficiency, which is basically talking about moving in accordance to the way that the body and the joints are designed. So the three big ones are maintaining a neutral spine. So when we hip hinge, we want to maintain a nice neutral spine position because that allows the posterior muscles on the back to hold the spine and resist against forward shearing, right? That's number one. Number two is we're going to facilitate hip-centric rotation. So it's no mistake that you've got ball and socket joints either side of our spine. That's designed for a very specific reason because ball and socket joints like to move and got a lot of range of motion and powerful through range of motion, whereas this, as you can clearly see, is not a ball and socket joint. So we should be facilitating movement from here and rotation from here rather than putting excessive strain on the spine. And then the third final pillar is that we're using posterior chain powered kinetic movements, right? So we're linking in that whole posterior chain, as that posterior chain is what we should be utilizing more than the anterior chain, because again, it buttresses the spine and also allows us to output more athletic potential and movement as well. So we like those for so many different reasons, but those three in particular. So let's get into the hip hinge. One of the first levels that we often get our patients to go into for the hip hinge is actually on the knees, right? So we've got the AirX pad on the floor here. So what the kneeling position does is it helps to eliminate the restrictions in ankle mobility that people may have, and also really trains you to move from your hips and a little bit of knees as well. So what we do is we tell the patient, palms on the thighs, okay? And what we're focusing on here is driving the hips back and down as our hands slide down towards our knees, okay? We want to maintain a nice still spine as we're moving down. We're going to be hinging from that position there. As you can see, I'm going down from my hips and my knees and then extending up from the hips again. So we're facilitating that hip hinge movement. So go again. So hips back and down, spine staying in a nice neutral position. And then from there, I like to envision that we are got wires at the front of our hips and they're pulling us forward, right? So pulling from that position. What we don't want to do is extend up from the spine there. We want to actually visualize that the hips are being pulled forward and the trunk stays nice and neutral, right? So that's the first level of the hip hinge, which is the kneeling hip hinge. So a nice way to progress that is actually to grab a Swiss ball, and we're going to be using this while we're doing the kneeling hip hinge. So set up again, knees nice and wide, feet together. And what I want to focus on when you're in this position is that you want your fingertips to be as light as possible on the ball. So we don't put too much pressure on the ball, because when you put pressure down here, you're actually going to switch on more of your anterior core. And again, we're trying to use that posterior chain. So we just want very, very light fingertips. But what the ball actually helps us to do is keep that torso nice and upright, so we're not flexing down as we do the hip hinge, right? So in this position again, light fingertips, looking straight forward, and then again we're going to facilitate that hips going back and down, holding that position and then extending back up, right? Looking straight forward, hips back and down, and then extending back up. So with this one, with the arms out again, we're going to slightly increase the load on those extensors, which will be a nice way to progress those, and then the ball there really helps to facilitate a nice tall chest position. So that's a nice progression to go through. So once you've mastered the kneeling hip hinges, we like to get up onto our feet, right? So it's a nice progression from here. And nice and simply, we're going to do what we did in the kneeling position, obviously just standing. So similar sort of thing, you want your hands on your thighs, okay? Looking straight forward, and we're going to facilitate that hip hinge back and down, right? Again, tall chest position, looking straight forward. Then from this position here, we're going to pull those hips through to extend us. And again, what we don't want is that extension of that spine. We want to facilitate all that hip rotation that's pulling us through, right? So what can be a nice one to do is, if you are struggling with that hip hinging, is to make yourself a bit of a target, right? So we've literally just got the pads there and the mat, and this is a target for my hips to go to. So as you'll see from here, I'm going to try with my hips to touch, obviously not to sit on it because I won't sustain my weight, but just to touch there, it's giving you a nice target to aim for. So again, hands on the thighs, and I'm going back and down from the hips. That's my target, and then coming back up. And this is a great way for people who are struggling with hip-centric rotation and who use a lot more knees than we should. And that's where we get the anterior chain coming involved. So to demonstrate what we don't want to do is if we're doing a lot of that, right, which is from the knees. And the problem with that is that we don't get that posterior chain involved, we don't get the glutes, we don't get the hamstrings, and we can't facilitate them in the movement. And we're also limited because your knee is a hinge joint, whereas obviously the ball of your hip joint is a ball and socket joint, right? Which has got a lot more range of motion than the knee joint. So again, this is a nice target to aim for. If you're struggling with more knee dominant, put the target back and down, and so you're getting your hips to hit that and then coming back up from that position. Then from there, what you can do is grab a PVC pipe or a broomstick, whatever you prefer. And we're doing the same thing. What we like about this is it helps to actually make sure that you're maintaining a neutral spine. So if you're struggling with feeling like you're flexing or overextending from the spine, grab one of these, and we want to make sure that it's touching the 2 points of contact the whole time. So basically your base of your spine, your sacrum, and then your head. That's where we want to be touching. And so from here, when you hip hinge, you can see that it's maintaining that same 2 points of contact, and I've touched the target there, right? So it's a nice one to aim for. And again, as you're coming back and down, think about those hips moving back and down. If you come from your knees, it's going to feel a bit awkward in this position. So again, we want to facilitate from the hips, back and down, maintaining those 2 points of contact, and then coming back up. And again, it gives you that nice feedback, because if you start to flex your spine, you'll feel your head come away, all right? So that is a progression for when you're standing to nail the hip hinge. So we like to start with kneeling and then progress to the standing. And then we've got one final one coming up for you next, which is going to be the more advanced one, and it's going to build our athleticism. All right, so now the more advanced progression of the hip hinge is a tap down variation. So with this one, the tap down is going to challenge our stability a bit more, because we're going to go single leg. Right? So we've done double leg and double knees before. Now we're going to do a single leg. So you've got a little bit more challenge to go through, and it's a nice way to really improve your overall functional capacity, because we do a lot of things, single leg running, hip hinging. Sometimes we've just got that single leg. So this is a higher level, more demanding and more challenging, but going to improve your overall capacity. So all we need for this one is a step. Now you can use, plates and stack up some plates, or find a step at home, whatever works for you. But we want to be in a raised position, so we're going to be tapping down. So the setup for this one is pretty simple. You're going to come stepping on the step, okay? The starting position, you want to look straight forward. Now, we like to play around. You can have your arms out in front or hands by your side. Arms out in front is what we generally start off with, because it's a little bit easier to counterbalance. So what we're going to do from here is arms out in front. And the initial key, with so many people get wrong, I like to explain it like load your hips, right? So set your hinge is what I often say to patients. So what I mean by that is here, and we're going to set the hinge. And this is where you'll feel the increase in tension of the hamstrings and the glutes, because we're loading posteriorly into them. And that will stop you doing the knee dominant movement. So that knee comes forward. Again, we want to get that posterior chain involved. So that's setting the hinge is a key point that we like to start off with. Okay, so arms out in front. You're going to set the hinge, and then from there, your leg's going to come back behind you, and you're just going to tap that one on the floor, and then coming back up, right? So again, I'm setting the hinge, arms out in front, leg goes back. We're just tapping down and then coming back up. And you want to keep that tap nice and light. So imagine that you've got like shells, eggshells on the floor, and you don't want to break them. You just want to tap on, because we don't want the load to come off that working leg onto the other leg. We want to keep it on that working leg the whole time, okay? So then the next variation from there is hands on the hip. Same thing. You want to set the hinge, so neutral spine, posterior chain engaged, and then from there, leg goes back, tapping down, and then extending back and up, right? Nice and controlled. Set that hinge there, and then we're going to be tapping down and then extending back up from the hip. And that's really challenging, but it's going to facilitate all those three key pillars that we like to do, which is neutral spine maintenance, hip-centric rotation, and posterior chain powered movement. So this is a nice progression. Obviously do both on the same side, one on either side, and make sure that you're not sacrificing reps for technique, right? Because it's very easy to start to just load your quads, right? We want to make sure that we're keeping it in that hip, that posterior chain, tapping down from that position. And trust me, after you've done a couple sets of these, 8 to 10 reps, you'll really feel a good burn in those posterior chain. So those are the progressions of how you can master your hip hinge, right? Fundamental movement pattern that's not only going to reduce injury risk and help with injury recovery, but also improve your athletic and functional performance as well. So we start with the kneeling all the way up to the single leg tap down. Give those ones a go. Your spine will thank you, but also your hips will feel a lot stronger and a lot more facilitated and involved in your movement patterns. And we're going to overall improve your functional capacity. So try those and let me know how you go.